Our next guest, writing on his Ask Questions Later Substack, that there are 5 crucial questions he wants to see answered about the ceasefire. So let's welcome in Dan Perry, a former Associated Press Middle East editor who joins us now. Welcome, Dan, as always. So we might as well, you've done this for us, right, in terms of the questions. They're great questions. So let me just put up on the screen the 5. Will Israel truly end the war in exchange for the hostages? Can the government survive in Israel if the far right rebels against this? Will the moderate opposition help Netanyahu? Is there a way to remove Hamas from Gaza? And did Trump make any promises to Israel? First on the war. So what's the kind of the play here? What do you think is next? What are the concerns about whether it will be truly over?
Well, this is being presented essentially as a deal to end the war in return for all the hostages, and it would leave Hamas in power in Gaza. It isn't easy for Israel to accept that, but this appears to be what the deal amounts to if all 3 stages actually happen. The discourse in Israel right now is really about the first stage. This is a 6-week period during which 33 hostages will be returned, and during which they will discuss the modalities, the specifics of the final stages. Whether that actually reaches its full implementation and the war is over remains to be seen. Netanyahu has apparently promised the far right in Israel and his coalition, which does control the ultimate fate of that coalition, that Israel maintains its options somehow open. So there is, in the Israeli political discourse, some suggestion that in fact maybe the first stage will be all there is and they will return to the fighting. But that is very definitely not how Biden sees it, nor how Trump sees it.
I guess one of your questions suggests that, and I'm wondering how much you think Netanyahu's political future kind of affects all of this, and what is his political future? Does his government survive?
Well, the far right doesn't want the war to end. They prefer permanent occupation of Gaza. They prefer, indeed, renewed Jewish settlement in Gaza, which would, I have to tell you, Connell, be a complete calamity for Israel, never mind the Palestinians. And it would also be extremely unpopular in Israel. So Netanyahu's rock and hard place basically are that the right wing might potentially bring down his government if he follows through with all stages of this deal. But on the other hand, if he doesn't, then that will harm the right wing's political prospects in a longer term because the deal is extremely popular.
What might the timing of that be, though? The timing of the
war to be over.
Right, of course. The timing of, quote unquote, bringing down the government versus the stages of the deal. In other words, could something happen in Israel before all of the phases are implemented, or when we're going into phase 2? Or
I think money time will be in about 6 weeks when the first stage is over, when the U.S. is pressuring like nobody's business for the second stage to be implemented, when the Israeli public wants the second stage to be implemented, which would mean not just the end of the war, but the return of the remaining hostages, because there are 98 hostages living and dead, and only 33 will be returned in the initial phase. At that point, the right wing may indeed bolt the government, and if they do, then the government could collapse. Now, understand, if the government collapses, that triggers new elections, and all the polls show that the right wing as a whole would lose those elections. I think the prospect of being in opposition might focus the minds of even the most fanatical right-wingers, and in the end, their bluff might be called. There's potential for them to leave the government but not vote against it, so it becomes sort of a protest arrangement that doesn't bring down a government. But bottom line, the deal absolutely does constitute a danger for Netanyahu's long-term survival prospects.
Between now and then, it's Netanyahu and his relationship with Trump. The Times of Israel headline we can throw up talks about, with the deal, Netanyahu's going all in on Trump. What would you say about that in terms of the risks for Netanyahu, and whether that's, I guess it's the only move, but whether it's beneficial for him? I mean, and his relationship with Trump.
Look, Netanyahu went all in on Trump. I mean, Netanyahu has promoted a discourse in Israel where Trump is practically the savior of the country. He openly supported the Republicans in Trump's election campaign. It would be difficult for him to not succumb to Trump, I would say. In the end, the fact is that the deal Netanyahu has accepted is the same deal that was on the table throughout most of the past year and promoted by the Biden administration. It was more difficult for him to resist Trump's pressures than it was to resist Biden's. That's the inescapable conclusion. And if Trump really continues to insist that the war will be over, I suspect indeed the war will be over. Netanyahu will have to bite the bullet and take his lumps and hope that the right wing is more strategic from their perspective than to actually bring down his government, causing a moderate government in Israel to arise, which could, at that point, actually engage Trump and the Americans and the wider region in a process towards a Palestinian state.
All right, Dan, few people know the region as well. He's covered it for so long. As Dan Perry, thanks for coming on, as always, with your perspective.